is Kurt Havens, and we're back again today with Nicholas Weir. What's going on, man?
Not much, man. Just usual Friday night, chilling. Finished all my check-ins for the week, which is always a nice feeling. So, yeah, how about you?
Same stuff. It's my Friday morning, I guess. We're that far apart because you're in Thailand now. We were going to talk about just better ways. You and I were speaking previously about better ways to leverage food versus gear or the combination, right? And like
Yeah.
mistakes we see with clients or coaching stuff. And I mean, like typically, how do you, if you get a guy who's new to this world or has been natural, not necessarily new, but and they're coming to you because they need to improve, they need to get bigger. Like what do you generally start with?
Well, yeah, assuming they've got like all their ducks in a row with their food, their training, that sort of thing. When it comes to the introduction of PEDs, the basics, and I think it'll be pretty similar to you, like testosterone only. And not because I think bioidentical hormones are better necessarily. Like I want to make that distinction very clear. Like I know a lot of people or a lot of coaches out there might be like, oh, let's do test only and then like from there eventually insulin and GH because bioidentical hormones are safer or healthier. And that's a bit of a fallacy, I think, like the whole like naturalistic fallacy. Like the derivatives are useful and I think in some instances probably less detrimental to your health, but it's more a case of predictability. You don't know what they're gonna respond like to the drugs. And if, say, for example, you start experiencing side effects and you're only running one compound, it's very easy just with basic deduction to figure out what is the reason for that. If you've got high E2 related side effects, you know it's elevated E2. You don't just have to think, oh, is it like the progestogenic activity of 19 or testosterone or something like that in the mix that's like increasing the estrogenic effects of the other compound. You don't have to worry about that polypharmacy. So yeah, basically just a low dose of testosterone. And instead of doing like a typical blast and cruise approach of say blasting for 16 to 20 weeks, cruising for 12 weeks, what I'll do is I'll start somebody at basically a little bit higher than a testosterone replacement dose. And on a needs basis, when they plateau, either adjust food or adjust PED load. So it might be they hit their first sticking point, they're still relatively lean, they don't look like they're getting softer, adjust food. If they hit another plateau down the track, they're looking a little bit softer, adjust PED load, that sort of thing. I'll just gradually, linearly adjust it over time. And it might be, say, their first cycle might be a year long because they're using such a small amount at such a low dose that they're not really accumulating any of those negative health effects that you would from higher dosages and other compounds in the mix. And then, yeah, once you get to that point, obviously getting blood work along the way, when blood work starts to show signs of, okay, health deterioration, something like that, pull them down to a TRT dose, sit there, and then you can start their next phase where you might, say, introduce a DHT derivative, or you might just start with a high dose of testosterone only. If they're responding well to that and there's no signs that things aren't progressing, like if it isn't broken, don't fix it. But when they exhaust, they exhaust that ability to progress and grow on just that one compound, introduce a different compound. Yeah.
Cool.
Is that kind
Yeah.
of like how you approach it?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think the reason why I brought this up, or you and I talked about doing this topic, is I'm getting a lot of newer guys now, guys in their 20s, early 30s, that are want to jump right into multiple compounds, and then even after you advise them, they still insist on doing this stuff, and then they have side effects and all sorts of side effects. And then, like you said, what is it coming from? And then you got to do labs, multiple labs, and look at all these different things just to figure what's wrong in it. You end up having to pull it back just to test anyway. So to me, it would be easier just to start in a sane, logical way, like you said. And I think the other interesting thing that you brought up was the time. I think these guys have this number in mind of how long a cycle lasts, right? And there's really no science there. You kind of, as long as your goal is reasonable, I would say you run something and titrate up until the goal is achieved, right? And then you can pull back, right? I mean, if someone
Yeah.
wants to gain 40 pounds of muscle on a cycle, that's most likely not a realistic goal. But if someone's 10 or 15 pounds, assuming that they have room in their genes to go still, I think that's totally realistic. And, it might not take 8 weeks. It might not take 12. It could take 20, 25, 30 weeks. As long as you're doing, like you said, where you're starting in a sane place and you're slowly increasing it and there's no side effects. I don't really see a problem in that versus the standard, like you run it for 12 weeks and you come off. It seems so
Yeah.
strange to me to do it prematurely. And I think another technique that I've used or that I was taught, and I'm just curious how you felt about it, was
Mm,
when like how to leverage food versus gear. So
mm,
what I was taught was when size slowed down, like progress with growth slowed down, you increase food, right? But when
mm,
strength stopped increasing, generally you would increase gear, and you
mm.
could go back and forth. Like I know that like that's a pretty common thing. Is I would never do both at the same time because then you don't know
Yeah.
what's actually working, what's not working. And I would always rather push food. That
Yeah.
makes sense. I don't know what you do, especially younger guys. I feel like they're too anxious to do things that are not going to, be healthy for them.
Yeah. Yeah. No, 100%. Oh, I think that's a good approach to take. I also kind of use a little bit of, I suppose, visual feedback to guide me as well. Like there's a kind of like a cosmetic, what do you call it?
Like body fat, you're looking at, or smoothness,
Yeah.
water retention.
Yeah. I was trying to look for the appropriate term, but basically, like, there's multiple metrics for gauging progress. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm looking for, and yeah, one of the metrics among, like you said, size slowing down or strength slowing down. Also look for body composition deterioration. So um, obviously, fat gain is inevitable in a surplus in a growing phase. It's going to happen, but we want to mitigate it as much as possible and just minimize the like fat accrual along the way. And I think when you hear that strength plateau, escalating dose is usually an appropriate move because I mean, food is going to increase the surplus size, but it's not necessarily going to increase neuromuscular efficiency,
Mhm.
whereas anabolics will. We know there's a neuromuscular efficiency component to that, especially DHT derivatives. But I mean, testosterone, you get that reduction to DHT by 5-alpha reductase and all that sort of stuff. So I mean, you're still getting that adrenergic effect or that neuromuscular improvement. And I think definitely escalating dose will help with like the motor learning side of things, which can then obviously help push through a strength plateau, allow you to use heavier loads, expose the muscle tissue to more mechanical tension, and then drive further growth. But yeah, I think if you're noticing a bit of a softening of the physique, escalating dose is usually a better approach, I think, than increasing food because
Yep.
if you push their body composition down further, then it's only going to negatively affect their response to the drugs. They're going to accumulate more fat because they're going to have a higher aromatase enzyme production, which is going to in turn cause more of that testosterone to be converted into E2. And so, I think a combination, the perfect storm would be using a combination of those two, I think.
Okay. I think one of the interesting, so when I would set up someone's diet to accomplish this too, what I would typically do is I'll set the protein roughly where it needs to be, and that really won't change much. And dietary fat, I generally set inversely to carbohydrates. Like if the higher the carbs are, the lower the fat's going to be. And most guys, unless there's something different about them, particularly most guys, I'll generally run lower fat and higher carb diets, and the carbs really become the metric that I'll adjust there when we talk about increasing food. Like I would generally just drive the carbs higher and higher and higher until that the goal is reached. Is that something that you would leverage? Are you playing with both, fat and carbohydrates?
Yeah, I prefer carbohydrates. Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat as you when it comes to the nutrition side of things. The the body's requirements of fat are substantially lower than what a lot of people think. If you're getting your EPA, DHA, fatty acids, I mean, beyond that, like 30 grams of fat, dietary fat a day is going to be more than sufficient at moving the needle in terms of providing your body with the adequate fat stores or fat supplies to basically ensure that the cell membranes and stuff are all maintain that sort of thing, and then all the other functions in the body that fat is required for are fulfilled. But yeah, I mean, I prefer to push carbohydrates as well. And yeah, like you said, when food escalation is needed, like carbohydrates are my go-to. That's the needle mover. And yeah, I mean, protein, we know as calories increase, carbohydrates protein sparing. So there's no real need to increase protein unless, say, for example, I'll have some individuals who might have a out of control appetite, even in the off season, and they really struggle to adhere to just a moderate calorie surplus. I'll push their protein up. I'll escalate the protein along with the carbohydrates just to help control their appetite by
Satiation.
increasing, yeah, satiety, yeah. So that's the only time or instance I would probably push protein up. But yeah, I'm like you. I prefer to keep protein fixed throughout a growing phase, and then yeah. Or say, for example, they're really struggling to, because when I track macros in people's nutrition plans, I count the protein, carbs, and fats from all food sources,
You
not kind of
do.
like how
Okay.
Paul does it. Yeah. So in that instance, if say for example the meals start getting a little bit disproportionate in composition, like say they're eating like 600 grams of rice and they're only having 125 grams of chicken breast because if they don't do that, they overshoot the protein. I'll increase their protein just so they have a more normal
Yeah.
aspect or ratio
Um,
to their meal. Because who wants to eat a salad bowl of rice with like that much meat?
gross.
Not me.
Yeah,
Like that's
gross.
just not appealing. Yeah.
Okay. That's interesting that you count. So there's both schools of thought. I think it's kind of cool that you count the macros from everything. I know Paul and I basically not ignore, but we kind of disregard the
Yeah.
like. I don't count the protein that's in rice, for instance, or
Yeah.
I don't generally count the nominal amounts of fat that are in things like bread might have a slice or a gram or two of dietary fat. I generally don't count those things. And same with meat. I don't know how it is in Australia or Thailand, but the FDA in the United States allows a 20% margin of error on meat for fat percentage. So you could really be all over the place. Even if the label says it's got 4 grams of fat, it could be, double that and still
Yeah.
fall. So it's kind of hard to predict. So a lot of times when I do people's macros, I'll do fat as added fat. I'll
Mm.
add like a teaspoon of olive oil or something to it in order to get the number to a more appropriate amount if needed. But I don't generally push fat super high. Like you said, if someone's enhanced, it's generally not needed. I find in the women I coach, I keep the fat a little bit higher. They tend to feel better on it. Their blood sugar does better.
Yeah.
And obviously, and natural guys obviously need more dietary fat to
Yeah.
produce hormones. I think when it comes to compounds, my technique is similar to what you said. I would push testosterone. I would prefer testosterone over pretty much anything 90% of the time, unless someone's very sensitive to it. And then the second thing I would leverage is once it got to a point where there was no more growth or the side effects outweighed what they were getting from it, I would typically look at a DHT derivative. And that's kind of what, like something like Priambalin or Masteron would be something that I would personally leverage in for someone next.
Yeah.
I know a lot of even the TRT clinics in the United States now are pushing nandrolone on guys on TRT, which I think is a little nutty. I don't
Yeah.
personally look at nandrolone like a first call drug or a second call drug. I think it's very specific use, and down the road when you have a need for it, I'm not someone who really would choose to leverage that, especially in someone that's new or on lower dose stuff. How would you leverage? Like, what do you do with compounds?
Yeah. So similar to you, like testosterone only initially. I escalate testosterone as well as a first call if they are responding well to it. They're not, I suppose, side effect prone. But if they are, say they have excess aromatization, then yeah, move into a DHT derivative and starting off with the minimum effective dose of that and then adjusting on a needs basis. And then, yeah, when they're more advanced, looking down the path or the route of potentially adding in a 19 nor testosterone of some sort, whether it be nandrolone, decanoate, or like NPP, which is honestly the same compound at the end of the day. Like, it's just a different ester attached. But yeah, something like that. Yeah, I'm really reluctant to use 19 nors unless they're really required because, I mean, I'm sure you'd agree with me, although we have a general understanding of the pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics of nandrolone, the potential for it being very neurotoxic is still on the cards, and you don't want to use compounds that are potentially a lot more volatile than others
Yeah.
if all of them increase protein accretion to the same degree. Like they all, from what we can tell in terms of moving the needle for growth, they all do the same job. They've just got different secondary effects. And yeah, whether you need that secondary effect or not, say you're in a contest prep, you need that glucocorticoid advantage. that some of the things like trenbolone offer, then yeah, probably introducing a small minimum effective dose of that is worthwhile. But yeah, in the setting or the context of like an off-season and improvement phase, it's very rare that you need anything more than testosterone or testosterone and a DHT derivative. And then you can obviously down the track when they're more advanced leverage things like growth hormone, insulin if they're starting to have their carbohydrate load pushed quite high. Even if their like blood glucose levels are good, I find when you get north of 800 carbs, adding in even just 10 IU's Atlantis is beneficial just to take a bit of that stress off of the pancreas, like pancreatic beta cell function, and then yeah, just letting that kind of help along the way. But yeah, I mean, to quickly go back to what you said about nutrition too, I actually like the way that you and Paul approach nutrition. In fact, like I'd honestly prefer if my nutrition was approached that way. But yeah, the reason why I don't do it with my business, my athletes, and my clients is it's just as you know, the conventional way of approaching nutrition is you track everything,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like it would be a massive like mind fuck, for lack of a better term, if I did that with my clients and they'd just be hitting me with 21 questions like, oh, what do I do in this or that, like this situation? And I think it's difficult for a lot of people's minds to compute. How do I do that? Like, how do I just disregard fats from this and
Mm-hmm.
that? But to me, it's perfectly rational. Like, if you can't predict or accurately measure the actual amount of fat in your meats, you might as well disregard them and just pretend, okay, it's just a constant variable in the background. I'm not going to account it to my fat for the day, that sort of thing. Yeah, it makes sense to me because, yeah, when it comes to nutrition and nutrition labels, there's that margin of error, that buffer that they're allowed. And like you said, it was 20% with meats in the States. I think don't quote me on it, but from memory, I think they're allowed up to 20% leeway with everything in Australia.
Yeah,
Like
I think it's everything. Yeah.
all nutritional information. So whether it be your carbohydrates, fats, protein.
Yeah.
And so with that in mind, bearing that in mind, yeah, it seems kind of pointless to when you're looking at lean protein sources, chicken breast and stuff, to be counting the 3 grams of fat when it could be six sometimes. Say it's a bit of an obese chicken. You don't
Yeah.
know. You're just seeing the chicken breast. You can't use your vision and your eyesight and look at the chicken breast and say, this much, say, intramuscular fat, and this one has this much intramuscular fat. Like, you can't see the intramuscular triglyceride stores in chicken breast. Maybe in like beef, you can see a little bit of extra marbling, that sort of thing, but chicken breast, good luck. Like,
Yeah.
so yeah, it seemed, I get what you mean. It seems pointless, but yeah, back to the PEDs. I just wanted to put that in there because I think that's a good approach to nutrition. And I think it's probably a less neurotic approach to nutrition. I think when you track every little thing the way I do and the way 95% of people do, I think that's more eating disorder inducive. And the way you guys approach it is actually a little bit more, I don't want to say holistic, but just less neurotic, a little bit more
We're
sane.
sane. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
you have 2 points that I wanted to go back to because I think they're really interesting. Is
Mm.
you talked about all anabolic steroids yielding roughly the same growth, and I think this is something a lot of people don't get. Is you're pretty much correct. There are probably some exceptions. Proviron, for instance, doesn't really seem to yield any tissue growth.
Yeah.
Masteron could, we don't know, and that's the thing is DJ and I did a video yesterday where we brought up Masteron. I think the interesting thing about Masteron is it's never been studied in men, so we don't really
Mm.
know. That being said, I don't know why it wouldn't perform similarly to other DHT derivatives, except Proviron's an example of one that doesn't. So I can't really say. So it becomes anecdotal. Joe Schmo used Masteron and he gained X amount of pounds. So perhaps, I don't know. I would say with the exception of that, I think they're all pretty much similar. And like you said, most people judge either side effects or secondary effects as the effectiveness of the drug, right? They use DECA and they hold a little more water. And so they think it's more tissue. Meanwhile, it's not, right? And I think something people should understand is steroids are classified. There's a couple different ways to look at them, either class 1 or class 2. Class 1 meaning it interacts with the AR. Class 2, it doesn't. A lot of drugs have mixed activity. Like testosterone is a perfect example of mixed. It does both, or genomic and non-genomic would be another way to look at this. So nandrolone is specifically, and trembolone, basically the androgen receptor, right? So it might bind more firmly to the AR and cause more gene transcription through the AR than testosterone does. But Testosterone also does non-genomic things that those two drugs don't do. So I've been saying this a lot lately, that nandrolone doesn't do anything anabolically that testosterone does not, right? Like, people always put it on the shelf like it's somehow better for growing. And just because its AR binding is better doesn't mean that overall there's more growth that's accrued, right? Like, if you look at nitrogen retention studies, they're all pretty similar. Nandrolone might hold a little bit more nitrogen, but it goes back to that, is nitrogen retention is not the whole picture. It's just one aspect of how a drug works versus, right? You know,
It's
Trembolone, for
like
instance,
gauging muscle growth just with body weight, as opposed to tape measurements like,
a
visuals, that
DEXA
sort
or
of
an
thing.
MRI.
Very one dimensional, and you can't
Yeah.
do that.
And Trembolone, for instance, at a sane dose, even up to a very high dose of 100 milligrams a day, is not actually increasing protein synthesis at all. It's just stopping protein breakdown. So the yield is greater because you're not really losing any nitrogen, but you're not necessarily pushing it in a positive place. So it's, people misunderstand these, right? Or they'll take things like Anadrol or D-bol, and there's side effects like water, headache, your blood pressure goes up, and you're stronger. So you assume that it must be better than something like testosterone, when in reality it's not, right? As soon as you stop D-bol, the weight goes away. It's like pulling a tablecloth off a dinner table with the dishes still on it. It's gone.
Yeah.
I think the other cool thing, when you brought up like a more sane way to do it, the reason why I gravitate toward the same method that Paul uses for food tracking is just that, is I found for myself for years, if not decades, I never actually tracked my food per se. Sometimes I would go back and add up what I was eating just to see, but I learned from a guy named Bill Phillips years ago in the 90s how to look at food by using your hand as a guide. And it kind of taught me that the human body is pretty flexible, right? Metabolism is not this static thing, and it's constantly moving and constantly flexing. And the human body will forgive different things daily. You know, it's over the course of time, consistency that causes a change. So, like, if you were to eat 400 grams of carbs one day and 200 grams the next day, and it were to average out, it would still be an average weight gain or weight loss. It's not necessarily like one day you're going to get fat, one day you're going to get thin. And that's kind of where I gravitate. I think for most of my clients, especially the lifestyle ones, to ask them to weigh and measure things exactly seems like that. It seems like disordered eating to some extent. Right? Like, going into a show, you really need to look at these things because every little detail is going to matter. But for the average guy, at least that I deal with, that's not an active competitor, or even guys in the off season, I don't find it that relevant. Like, if they're going to use, let's say they're going to use peanut butter versus olive oil for a fat source, I don't care about the carbohydrates and the protein that's in peanut butter. To me, it's irrelevant because it's a not complete source of protein. So you're not really using it. And the fiber is not absorbed. So that's kind of the way I would deal with that versus, I just look at the 10 grams of fat in each and I would call them equivalent, even though peanut butter clearly has more calories. If that makes sense. I just feel like it's more sane to look at.
It makes way more sense. Yeah, it definitely does. And I mean, if you look at it too from the perspective of, you're a bodybuilder, you eat the same foods day in, day out. Even if the fat content is varying a little bit from one chicken breast to the next, you're eating the same foods, the same quantities of the same foods day in, day out. It will average out over time. If, say, for example, you're approaching your diet with a very, if it fits your macros, flexible dieting approach, where you're eating different crap every single day, that's when tracking all of the fats and carbs might be a little bit more applicable and relevant. But yeah, if you're eating a quote unquote bodybuilder diet, micronutrient dense, minimally processed whole foods, similar selection of whole foods day in, day out, you don't need to think about that stuff.
Yep. Yeah, we typically, I know I hate to keep speaking for Paul, but what I typically do is I'll do macros for most people. Some of the lifestyle guys, I just teach them how to eyeball stuff so they can just live their life and they're still getting a result. It might not be as extreme as someone who's going to track to an extent, but I do macros, and in an extent, it's kind of what fits in your macros. But then from there, I give an approved food list, generally for guys that don't understand, because what you mentioned about if it fits in your macros, where guys go wrong with that is then they think anything as long as it fits somehow in these numbers, it somehow is going to work, right? And we know for a fact that, like, if you ate 2,000 calories of chicken breast versus 2,000 calories of peanut butter, you're going to look very different, even though the energy is the same, right? Like, a calorie is a calorie, but your body deals with it very different. And that's where I think a lot of guys go wrong is they'll take macros and they'll just plug random junk into it to make it fit. And like you said, then you actually need to track all the little nuances because it's going to be way off.
Yeah. And not only macros, micros as well.
Yeah.
Like micronutrient intake is completely skewed when you do that and throws that micronutrition off way off par from what it should be. And then, yeah, you might downstream run into a bunch of nutrient deficiencies that do affect growth and retard recovery and that sort of thing. And we don't want that. We want, we want that perfect environment for growth. And yeah, a lot of people, like you kind of alluded to, they miss the forest for the trees because they go about approaching it the wrong way.
Yeah, it's the health thing, like you just said, is important too, right? Like I notice my guys or women that grow the best, stay the leanest, make continual progress, tend to be the healthiest. They tend to be paying attention to not only the macros, but the micros, right? They tend to not be deficient in things. They're also eating. There's something to be said about eating things like chicken or rice daily, but there's also something to be said about having some sort of variety in your diet. You know, where Colton and I talked about the other day, I think there's some health. Like I personally, I have a pretty generous calorie allotment. I burn a lot of calories, so I can get by with more food than a lot of people. So I make an effort to make sure I eat, 2 pieces of fruit a day. I make sure that I eat enough fiber. I think people really forget about fiber.
Oh, big time. And it's probably one of the best lines of defense against colon cancer.
And just general health, right? You're helping your body clean out all sorts of garbage. Like if you were to just eat chicken and white rice all the time, you're seriously going to be deficient in a lot of things, even if you supplement, right? Because there's not a lot of fat. There's not a lot of things that'll even help you absorb those nutrients if you took vitamins with those foods.
Yeah.
I think where it's useful is if a guy is bulking and he needs a lot of food, like roughly how many calories do you take in the off season? Like what are you eating?
At the moment, off season, I'm in a mini cut at the moment, so I'm on like 4,000 calories mini cutting, but off season growing like close to 6,000.
Okay. So like a guy like you, 6,000 calories. The problem is if you put too much fiber in there, you can't stomach the 6,000 calories. It's gross.
Yeah.
So you could probably but you could probably base 80% of your diet on those traditional bodybuilding foods. And then the other 20%, you could probably fill in with, I hate to say healthier because some of it's subjective and some of it's truly not healthier, but just more dense vitamin rich food, right? Like you could probably backfill in vegetables and oatmeal and things like that would actually help you improve your health versus just trying to fit 6,000 calories of rice in.
100%. Yeah. So just to ensure good gastric motility, I try aim for, my general rule of thumb is per 1,000 calories, about 15 grams of fiber.
Okay.
And it sounds like a lot, but I think if you slowly titrate up to that amount of fiber, you're fine. The body seems to only get gastric distress and symptoms of bloating, I find, when you make drastic jumps in fiber intake. If you slowly escalate things over time, the body, like you kind of said earlier, the body's very adaptive. You don't have to eat the same amount of calories every single day because our energy expenditure, although we do similar activities and stuff, say we do like 30 minutes of cardio a day, that sort of thing. We might fidget more one day. We might talk on the phone and walk around. That burns. So nothing's completely static day to day. Same thing in this instance. I think the human body is very adaptive in the sense that if you make small adjustments and changes over time, it will adapt. It's the reason why people can survive on a vegan diet. Vegan diet is not the optimal diet for humans. I hate to break it to people. An omnivorous diet is, but the human body is very adaptive, and we haven't gotten this far in the evolutionary process and survived this long if we weren't very adaptive and robust and able to adjust to our environment and conditions. So I think slowly introducing more fiber is a good way to kind of build up to a healthy intake, because I think relying on fiber supplements like Metamucil and stuff, even though it's better than nothing, it's not ideal. Get it from Whole Foods. Same thing as like the whole protein bar versus meat argument. Get your protein from meat. Don't get it from protein bars. Why are you getting it from a secondary source?
Yeah, I think bars in particular too. Like I keep some upstairs in a cabinet for the times that I'm on calls all day, and it's like you're not. I'd rather eat that than not eat. But or I'll keep some in my bag or something if I'm out. But I'm the same as you. Like those would be my last call things. I think that there is an opportunity to use like a whey isolate powder post workout if needed. Like I'd rather someone use that than not eat or not eat adequate. Like me personally, after I lift, I really don't have much of an appetite to eat chicken. It's like I'll use whey in that case, but then I try to eat the rest of my food from, or get the rest of my protein from real sources if possible. But yeah, the bar thing is tricky, right? I know that they also tend to have a lot of other weird ingredients to make them palatable and, creamy or smooth or crunchy or whatever texture they're going for. And that stuff really adds up and it's just junk.
Yeah, definitely. And a lot of people don't realize, like, towards the macro counts, I mean, to the calorie count, I think they do have to count the calories from sugar alcohols from memory, but they don't have to count the actual carbohydrates. So people get a bar and they think, oh, this is low carbohydrate. Yeah, it's low carbohydrate if you don't count the sugar alcohols, but if you count the
Yeah.
sugar alcohols, that 3 gram of carb protein bar is actually a 33 gram of carb protein bar, and people don't pay attention to that. But yeah, so I think the labels are very misleading due to all those additional ingredients, like you said. But I mean, in instances for convenience, like you mentioned, it's an ideal candidate. That's what protein bars ideally should be used for, to fill those little voids and gaps throughout the week where you don't have time to prepare a meal, where you are on the go. Like, if it was an absolute last resort, I would use one too, but it wouldn't be my go-to, and I wouldn't have it to try, I don't know, increase the palatability of my food for the day. I'd just eat a piece of meat.
Yeah,
And if I wanted to increase the palatability of that, put a little bit of sauce on it. I'd rather see somebody eat a chicken breast and put a bit of regular barbecue sauce on there
totally.
than to see them eat a protein bar and then have diarrhea the rest of the day
Yeah.
from the sugar
When like,
alcohols.
and people freak out about the little stuff, right? So like you said, barbecue sauce or ketchup or steak sauce or whatever. I mean, to me, it's such an insignificant amount of, like you're talking a teaspoon, like really what's the 5 grams of sugar going to do to someone's body composition? It's not doing anything. It's not causing any harm. So I would rather someone use, like you said, sauces, salsa, whatever they got to put on their meat to make it somewhat enjoyable versus eating, like you said, like a bar. Like those are a last resort. And I think it's not a direct correlation, but you tend to see the guys with the best, girls with the best body composition typically don't supplement that much, right? They eat the most real food. I don't even know if it's such a thing as the quality of the supplement as much as I feel like the people that don't put the effort in to prepare their own food probably don't look that great. It's more of almost that than it is A to B, right? It's not to say you
I
couldn't look
agree.
great if you used a supplement to supplement your food, if it was done correctly. I think just the habits of the people that tend to do those sort of things aren't conducive to looking great, right? Because they probably cut corners other places, right? They're like, well, if I don't have to cook this, maybe I don't need to do cardio. Maybe I don't need to do this or that. I can probably, at least in my experience, those are the guys who are not going to do cardio. They're the guys who are not going to not drink booze. It's like there's always a shortcut there, and they seem to be the same people who want to rely on the garbage.
I thought you were going in that direction. I'm glad you did. Yeah, I 100% agree with you there. It's the whole habit thing. I mean, the way somebody does one thing in their life is usually how they do everything in their life, or the way somebody approaches one area of their life is how they. Yeah, it's as the saying goes, and it's so true. It's incredibly true to the core. And yeah, the people that I've worked with and that I work with currently, the ones that do see the best results and don't fall off the bandwagon are the ones that take it seriously. They look at it from a standpoint of, okay, this requires effort. I've got to do this if I want the outcome, not what supplements can I take, what protein bars can I eat to make this whole process easier.
Yeah,
If you want easy, you're gonna get easy
yeah. Wrong
results.
sport.
If you Yeah, exactly.
It's
And easy results aren't good results. They're
no.
just yeah.
And one of the common themes too is for some reason in the fitness industry, people seem to think that somehow less can be more, right? I mean, I think
The
work output and things like
hit
that are
training
individual,
zealots.
but it's funny because the same with the food. It's like it's the only area in the world that people think they're going to find success somehow by doing less, right? I don't know anyone who's ever become a millionaire. I don't mean inherited millions of dollars, but who's ever earned that much money by not putting constant work in over and over and over again and being uncomfortable often, right? Versus, and same in fitness. Like if you want to win bodybuilding shows, you want to look really good. it requires constant work over years and months at a minimum, if not years, if not decades, right? I mean, how long have you been doing this for? You've been doing this probably since you were a kid, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Like, I mean, yeah, I got into the occasional kind of lifting dumbbells and stuff in my dad's garage when I was a kid, and then I joined a gym when I finished high school. So yeah,
Yeah, I mean that's the thing, right? It takes a long time. I mean, you're pushing. What's your weight now? You're
before the mini cut, 265.
okay. Yes, you're a big guy,
Yeah,
and that doesn't happen overnight. No one's getting, from
yeah.
where did you start? You were 215.
I started at 127,
Okay, well there you go. So I mean, how many guys go from 127 to
and I'm
to
still growing. Like,
265? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're not stopping,
I'm
but it takes
actually,
time,
yeah.
right? This
It
wasn't like you
does.
did a 3 month challenge to get to 260.
Yeah, and I want to make a clarification. I'm not saying I started at 127 or whatever at like 5'4". Like I started at 127 at 6'1".
Right.
Like my height hasn't changed over this time frame. So I just wanted to make that clarification before people in the comment section jump in and be like, "Oh, you can't say your body weight that you're at when you're a
When you're
teenager and
12.
you
Yeah.
haven't finished puberty." I haven't grown anymore since I was 127. So I've
Yeah.
literally more than doubled my body weight over the course of the last decade, and it takes time.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's a marathon, not a sprint, and you got to be in it for the long haul. And I always try to say to people, use the whole bank account analogy or the savings account analogy. Every day you've got to make a deposit, a small deposit into that savings account if you want to see that grow over time. And every single day that you don't put a deposit in, or if you say take a deposit out, you don't gain interest on it for that year. And I say that to people because I try to reinforce that compounding interest effect that does occur. The more you like consistently do the daily tasks, the more of a snowball effect it has. And it's not that your rate of progress increases over time, but rather you just get better at doing the things and the overall efficiency of growth improves, I think. Yeah, not necessarily the amount though. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it can be consistent. I'm going to be 48 in a month, and I'm still making continual progress year after year. And it's
Exactly.
just steady. It's not. It's. I mean, maybe the first year. So I've been in a gym for almost 36 years. I was out for a number of years, 7 or 8 years, 9 years for a period of time. But the same thing. Like I got down to 130 or 140, and I'm 215 now. So but it took time to get back
Mm.
there, right? I mean, 5 to 10 pounds a year over time adds up to a lot of muscle. It just takes a long time. No one's gaining 40 pounds of mass, solid mass in 1 year, right?
Yeah.
If you look at like even guys like Nick Walker, what's he up about 10 pounds a year? Just
Yeah.
he's been
If you
doing it
average
for a
it
long
out,
time.
yeah.
If you average it out, that's all it is. It's nothing. None of these guys are gaining. I talked to a guy last night who, he's not advanced, but he's like a middle, like average experience, but he's not new to cycling, and he's not new to food. And his current goal is to gain about 15 pounds on his next cycle. And I personally don't think that that's a realistic goal at this point. Once you've gotten to a certain level of muscularity, right? It'd be like you gaining 20 pounds now at this point. Probably not going to happen
Mm.
in a year. You could do it in 2, maybe 2, 3, right? Because it really starts to slow down the bigger you get, because you're creeping toward
Mm.
300 pounds. I mean, at a certain point, it
100%.
becomes a genetic, a limitation. And I think that that's
Exactly.
another, we can talk about that too. I think, unlike, for some reason, when you talk about basketball or other sports, it's really apparent that it's genetics that's dictating it. Like I'm short, no way I could ever play basketball.
Mm.
And that just understood. No one would even question that if I said that. But if you say to someone who's got mediocre genetics that perhaps being a pro bodybuilder is not in the cards for them, I don't think a lot of people understand that, right? I think genetics are probably the biggest dictator in this sport, just like anything else. And I think that food is almost the secondary thing, and gear is probably just, it's like a far down third, because it's just expressing your genes, right? That's all you're doing, is you're causing gene transcription. So if you don't have the proper genes for it, what's transcribing? Like,
Exactly.
I'm sure you see that in your clients. Like you have guys that are hyper responders and you guys that just don't really respond.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you get that. There's such a variety Like you get those hyper responders, you even get the occasional non-responder, and then you get everyone in between. And yeah, there is a big genetic component, and a lot of people don't. I don't think want to accept that reality. They want to keep riding that delusion that anybody can be a pro bodybuilder if they take enough drugs and train hard enough and do it for long enough. And I mean, of course, sure, you might be able to take the whole NASA approach and blast heaps of gear, but look what happened to him. He dug
Yeah,
himself a very early grave.
at 50.
You can, yeah. And
He
so I
was dead at
think,
my age.
yeah, which is way too young. That's just
Yeah,
way
I
too
mean,
young.
I don't feel like I'm at any place in my life that it should be ending at this moment. Right? To
Yeah,
put that in perspective, Nasser was the same age as me when he died. That's
yeah,
pretty
which
tragic if you
is,
think about it. And I also think, and like you're saying, genetics tend to, in bodybuilding, I think genetics also dictate where you end up placing. With a few exceptions, I would say most guys that are in physique probably wish that they were in open bodybuilding. I can't speak for everyone. I'm personally not. I'm not personally, for my own look, I'm not a fan of open bodybuilding. It's not really a look that I go for, but I don't know the genetics for it anyway. I couldn't be at my height. I'd have to be 240, 250 because I'm too tall to be in 5'7". I'm pretty much too tall to be in 212. Be me and John Jewett would be the only guys on stage at that height in 212. And it's not on the cards. So I don't think I think people misunderstand when they see these guys in physique, like a Ryan Terry. Ryan Terry would be a bodybuilder if he could be a bodybuilder. That's what his genetics dictate where he can go, and that's pretty much caps. Same with Bumstead, right? Bumstead has some
mm,
health problems. It's as big as he can get. He's plenty big.
mm,
He's a lot bigger than I am, but that's it. Like he doesn't have the genes or the health to really push it any farther. And I don't think people understand. They think these guys decide. The guys that are in open bodybuilding, as soon as they started training and eating, they were freaks.
mm,
Most of them. And I mean, again, it still took time. It took time for Nick Walker to get there, but he just responded better than other people, and it continued to go. Right, like
yeah.
same as you. Like you have a lot greater growth potential than I do, so you can be an open bodybuilder. Right, you were in classic before.
Yeah, I was in classic before, but I haven't been able to have an actual off season for the last 2 to 3 years because if I had a proper off season, I would have outgrown classic, and I was really trying to stay in classic to get my pro card because I figured if I can go pro in classic and stay healthier, because if I stayed in classic, I wouldn't have to use over 900 milligrams a year on a prep, or like 900 milligrams a week. That would be way more than what I'd need. And a lot of people are probably going to chime in the comment section and say, "Oh, you're a liar. You're lying about your doses." I'm not. My first bodybuilding show, my contest prep peak doses, peak anabolic load was 650 milligrams. I placed first in first timers and first call out and opens, and if I was a little bit leaner, I would have probably placed in opens, but I didn't. But I came back my second prep, I won my class because I made a statement with conditioning. But yeah, like that's yeah. I think I could probably do open just because I purely like I've never had the luxury of being able to push the envelope. And now that I've said to myself, okay, I'm not going to hold myself to classic because I didn't go pro on the last show. I came second in overalls, and so I won my class second in overalls. I'm like, I made the promise to myself: if I didn't go pro that show, I'm just going to let my body grow, take the limiters off, and that's what I've done. And yeah, post show my rebound was stupid. Like it just yeah, it like I keep pinching myself, thinking that I'm going to wake up the next day because it just doesn't feel real. Yeah.
Yeah, you made a lot of progress. Yeah, I think I think that's just very misunderstood, right? It's you look at, and just like you were saying, like Chris Bumstead, I think was pretty candid about his off-season cycle, and it was something like 500 milligrams a test, and people were like, "I don't believe that at
They thought
all."
he was lying, yeah, but it's
Well,
true.
why would he need more? He technically can't grow anymore. He's at the top of his weight cap. So what
Yeah,
doing more stuff isn't going to help him because it's just going to push him to weight that he has to lose. Right? It
exactly.
make
Yeah.
no sense. Like if you wanted to stay, like my classic cutoff is 182. Like I'm well above that cutoff. I don't need to gain any more weight if I want to do classic. It's just muscle I'd have to lose at this point. It's not going to make me any better.
Mm, exactly.
You
And
know?
so you kind of in that situation where it's like, okay, well, I just need to stay in a very conservative surplus at most.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
I mean, I think that that's it. But I think to conclude or wrap it up, I think people need to look at the whole picture, right? I think
Yeah.
it's food, it's genetics, it's possibly the addition of steroids if you're at that level and that is conducive with your goals and your health. But I think that it's not just I don't think it's just pushing. Like, I think a lot of guys just want to jump on steroids, and I don't think that it's necessarily about just pushing that one metric up without addressing some of the other things like we talked about.
Yeah.
Do you have anything you want to say to wrap it up?
Probably just to add a little bit onto the genetic component of the discussion. A lot of people have this misconception that having good genetics for bodybuilding just means having good muscle insertions or being able to grow well or being able to get lean, but it also means having a high tolerance for drugs. If you can tolerate drugs very well, if your body can just tolerate more general abuse, that is a very big component to having good genetics for bodybuilding. If you aren't able to, like we see with Chris Bumstead right now, he can't do open bodybuilding, not because he can't grow well, not because he can't get lean, not because he doesn't have good insertions. He has all of those. He ticks all those boxes. The only thing that is holding him back, the only thing that is a rate limiting factor is his body cannot tolerate any more stress. It cannot tolerate any more trauma or damage. And if it could, he could just simply escalate the dosages a little bit and he would just cruise right on into opens with no issues. Probably be open Mr. Olympia, for all I know.
I agree. Cool, man. Well, it's always great having you on here. If you're trying to reach Nick, is obviously a coach. You guys have seen him on here a bunch of times. I will put his link tree down below. He's on Instagram. He has his own YouTube channel, obviously coaching. Cool, guys. Thank you so much for joining. Like and subscribe.